Do you want to do a Q&A episode for Friday?
Do we have enough AskATPs to just like kind of expand on some of those?
We
have a million.
Well, we have a billion of them. With respect, not all of them are very good. But
we can take real-time questions from the chat room, and just the entire show will be like, no, that's not good a question. Nope, I don't like that one. Anyone like that one?
It would be the worst live show ever.
Just be us yelling at the chat room. Ask good questions.
Let's start with, I wanted to call attention to something that is near and dear to our hearts. This show, all three of us are also hosts on Relay FM, and Relay is doing a 5th anniversary extravaganza live show, event in San Francisco in August. So coming up, I believe it's Thursday, August 22, so in a few weeks now. But tickets have been on sale for a while. I don't think there's too many left. So if you wanted to see some of your ATP co-hosts in next month, then you can certainly feel free to grab a ticket to the Relay Live event. I think they're $30. I'm going to stall for time and confirm that, yes, they are $29. And so if you would like to check that out, if you happen to be in the San Francisco area or fancy a pilgrimage to the San Francisco area, like I said, 2/3 of your hosts will be there. Probably your favorite 2/3. Am I right? Yeah, I'm totally right.
Probably not. Everyone loves John.
All right, moving on. Let's somebody tell me about iOS 13 charging optimization.
There's a tidbit that people keep sending us, and I at least have known about it since WWDC, but we never had occasion to mention it. And I think it's worth mentioning because this is an eternal topic on our show. We've done, I think, multiple Ask ATP questions about this thing, which is, am I doing damage to my phone's battery by plugging it in when I go to sleep and leaving it charged at 100% all night long? Is it better if I just, charge it up at the last minute before I wake up? Should I be letting it sit around the 100% charge? All sorts of things like, am I doing bad things to my battery? And what we've said in the past is, yeah, it's not great, but the alternatives are all worse. You should just use your phone in the natural, reasonable way that Apple expects you to use it, and just deal with the fact that you're not babying your battery every second of the day, because the phone exists to serve you. You don't exist to serve the phone. So in iOS 13, Apple has added some features that will help you follow that advice of just use the phone like Apple expects you to use. And in iOS 13, assuming all goes well, it'll actually work better. And the way they do it is the phone tries to figure out, based on your schedule, when you wake up, when your day begins. And so when you plug it in before you go to bed at night, it doesn't immediately start charging it to 100%. It sits there and it doesn't pull in any charge until, it calculates it's going to take me, 20 minutes to charge. It waits until, let's say, 30 or 40 minutes before you wake up. Then it charges to 100%. So ideally, when you wake up at your normal wake up time, the phone has just charged to 100%. So it's not spending all night, every night, plugged in at 100%. Now, the downside of that is if it miscalculates or you have to wake up early or whatever, you could wake up to a phone that's not fully charged or hasn't even started charging in the worst case scenario. So I think this is an optional feature, but most of us who have boring lives on regular schedules, it sounds like a great way to transparently extend people's battery life. And if you don't want it, again, you can just turn it off, I think, and just let it charge the old-fashioned way. But I think it's a reasonable thing to default to on, especially if they're very conservative and they say, we'll try to be at 100% charge 2 hours before you wake up or 1 hour before you wake up. Chances are good that'll be fine. It would be great if there was something when you plugged it in that threw something up in your face and said, just so you know, I know you just plugged me in, but I'm not actually going to charge because I think you're about to go to sleep and I'm going to start charging right before you wake up. If that's not what you want me to do, hit this button, I'll start charging now. But that's a hell of a dialog box that no one's ever going to read, so I'm not sure how they would pull that off. But I thought this was a very clever feature to help people get more life out of their batteries.
Alrighty, we had a discussion last episode that Marco had brought up about using sparse disk images to enforce a quota for iPhoto. And a friend of the show, Dave Nanian, had some tips about maybe a different or better approach for that. Marco, do you want to take us through this, or perhaps John, since this is file system related?
I can't possibly let you get away with iPhoto there. It's a Photos app with iCloud Photo Library.
God, sorry. Yes, thank you.
And and so I recommended, my trick was when you're on, when you're not doing keep all photos in all their original mode, like when you're doing the optimize my space mode, like you might do on a secondary computer, like a laptop, My trick for that is to put the photos library in a sparse bundle disk image that you create with disk utility with a maximum size quota of, and I said mine was like 30 gigs or 50 gigs, something like that. And so it's a great way to make Photos app respect a certain disk size maximum. Dave Nanian, who is of Super Duper fame, knows quite a bit about storage and file systems and things like that. And he suggested basically for like safety and durability reasons that a sparse bundle disk image is not as reliable and safe and everything as just using a second APFS space sharing volume, which is the same trick I use to install Catalina next to Mojave and have dual boot here. So I literally just told everyone about that a few weeks ago, and here we are. I didn't even think about it for this use, but if you do the APFS space sharing volume, it gives you all the protections and integrity and everything of the native APFS file system, like running directly itself, not in like a simulated container. And so it's just safer and it's more flexible, and you don't have to like auto mount it using login items and everything. So that's actually a way better way to do it. So thanks, Dave Nanian, and check out Super Duper.
And I'm assuming the reason Marco hasn't done it that way is he came up with this scheme before APFS existed and has just continued to use it, right?
That is correct.
Right. So anyway, yeah, that's a good idea to convert that, and to get into a little bit of technical detail of why using a sparse bundle disk image is not a great idea. So when you're doing that, sparse bundle is this directory full of a bunch of little files, and there's this driver in front of it that makes it look like a disk to the operating system. And so when Photos is running, Photos thinks it's writing to a disk, and it says, I'm going to write out this JPEG or whatever, and it says, write this JPEG to disk. And the driver that sits in front of the disk image says, yep, sure, totally, I wrote that JPEG to disk. But that driver has its own set of caches and other, sort of coalescing I/O mechanisms and everything. And it hasn't actually written to disk. It was waiting to bundle it up with another big write because it's going to write out one of those stripe files somewhere or whatever. So at that point, Photos thinks everything is safe, but it's not safe because the bits haven't actually hit your disk yet. There's like a second layer of buffering there. So it's a situation where the application can think it's doing the right thing to always make sure that everything on disk is always either a complete image or a non-existent image, when in reality, it could be a partial image written to one of the stripes in the disk bundle because of that driver. So that's why APFS is safer, because that really is just the same old volume as your boot volume or any other volume. And when Photos says, please write this JPEG to disk, and APFS says it's done so, it has all the guarantees of APFS with no extra secondary layer underneath it. So, the wonders of APFS. We all need to get used to the fact that it's really easy and cheap to make volumes. And in case it wasn't clear from Marco's earlier discussions, when you make a new APS volume, you can choose to limit it, as they call it, like a quota or whatever. Like, you don't pick the size of your volume because you're not carving up your disk space. They're all sharing the same space in the container. And if you don't say anything, it'll just share all the space, right? But you can limit it. So when you create the APFS volume, just limit it to 30 gigs or whatever you want. And you have a extremely native as your boot disk way to manage your photo storage.
So, friends of the show, Fun Fact, which is a show with Eric Devins and Alan Pike, they have covered, to the best of their ability, the genesis of Wheel, which is was it a group? Is that right? That appears on the Mac that has some special meaning, and they did a whole segment on that this past week, and so we will link that episode in the show notes if you'd like to hear the results of our extreme digging, trying to figure out what the genesis of this was.
It's pretty awesome.
It was quite funny, as that show tends to be. So if you haven't checked it out, it is very good, and I quite enjoy it. Now, granted, I quite like both of the people who host it, so I'm predisposed to enjoy it, but nevertheless, it is quite good. And then BJ Rowland writes us with regard to the engineering standards. That was the pre-show of the last episode with shall versus must and things of that nature. BJ writes, engineering standards like civil, mechanical, electrical, etc. never use the word must so as to avoid confusion between legal obligations and requirements for compliance with the standard. The word must implies a legal obligation, whereas shall is a requirement to comply with the standard. And then BJ linked to me, and I will put in the show notes, a PDF from the American Petroleum Institute, which defines these. Shall denotes a minimum requirement in order to conform to the standard. Should denotes a recommendation or that which is advised but not required in order to conform to the standard. May denotes a course of action permissible within the limits of a standard. And can denotes a statement of possibility or capability. Who knew that much thought went into such short words? But that's the way it is.
And we can always trust what the American Petroleum Institute tells us.
Yeah, exactly right. Those big ice things up at the poles. Yeah, we don't need those. What are they even called? Nobody knows. We don't need them. Marco, tell me about the iPhone SE and your headphones.
Yeah, so quick updates on things I've talked about recently. Last episode, I believe, I discussed my my iPhone SE test phone that I had bought, and I've been switching my SIM into it sometimes, like to go out at night or something. I really like the size a lot. And one thing I've especially noticed is, like, just compared to my 10S, the SE is not only a lot smaller and not only fits a lot better in my hand and is easier to navigate, like, by hand, it's also a lot lighter. Like, I kind of didn't realize, like, over time, like, how heavy the iPhone has gotten since then. But, like, when you compare a 10S to an SE, it's a huge weight difference. And I've noticed this especially now in the summertime. I'm wearing shorts a lot. And it's really hot, and so I'm wearing these thin, light shorts. And having the 10S in my pocket is this. Not only is it this giant rectangle, which looks ridiculous and everything, and it's hard to get it out of the pocket and everything. The 10S weighs down my pocket, like it's almost like it's trying to pull my shorts off. Whereas
you might need to get tighter shorts now that you've lost all this weight. I actually ran into that recently. Like, I had some shorts that they were probably a little bit too big on me, and I think the waistband had sort of gotten stretched out. And yeah, I noticed the same thing. My big phone would be like, or the worst would be like I'd have my wallet and my keys and my phone, and they would just be pulling down my shorts. So try a smaller size.
This is the smaller size. Like, it's amazing how heavy the phone is when it's in a very lightweight garment, like, very light shorts. Really, I hope with future phones, I mean, I know this is the same problem of, like, all the competing desires. Like, if you ask me in the winter what phone I should get next, I would say, oh, maybe I should try the bigger one to have all that screen space. But, like, in the summertime, I'm like, I just want the smallest phone possible. I need, like, summer phone, winter phone here. But just one more point in the SE's favor there, and kind of one more vote for, like, hey, you know what? Actually, smaller phones might not be so bad to keep making them and keep updating them. So anyway, this fall when I'm back in jeans and they release some awesome new giant screen phone, remind me of this conversation, please. And when I'm saying, oh, maybe I should go for the big one, remind me that I said this. That no.
Well, you said that last time. The rumor is that the non-Max version is actually going to be a little bit smaller, so you're going to be getting what you want, a little bit smaller, but not
Yeah, although I believe that's for next year, but we'll see.
Oh,
and then a second minor update here. I went through this whole segment a few weeks ago about how I was doing my Power Beats Pro, and I really enjoyed them for summertime, except there's this nagging issue that you can't really, like, take them off and put them anywhere, because, like, you can't put them in your pocket because then their buttons get pushed and everything. And, well, I'm back to my Trex Air, my Aftershokz Trex. Is it Air? Yeah, the Air, the smaller ones. Yeah, I'm back to those. And yes, they are a sponsor of the show. They did not ask me to say this. They aren't sponsoring this week or that week for that matter. But yeah, I'm back to the Trex Air because I realized that they basically solved all the problems I had with the Beats. Like, because I can, when I don't need to be listening to them, or when I want to, like, take it off so I could, like, talk to somebody, I can just drop them down and have them, like, stick around my neck. And even if I have to put them in a pocket, they kind of stick out the top of the pocket. They can't go all the way in because of their shape, but no buttons get pushed. And they don't accidentally disconnect or reconnect or anything because they have their own power control. So I'm back to the Trex Air, my wonderful Aftershokz, and they are indeed the superior summer headphone. But I'll go back to the Beats Pro when it comes time to, like, go to the gym and stuff like that.
What about all those headphones? I think actually Beats makes some of them that it's two little bud thingies, but they're connected by a wire. That
was the previous Power Beats. I heard, I think from you, didn't Tina go through a lot of those? So one of our friends, like, their spouse went through a lot of them because they kept breaking. I forget who it is.
Well, Kyle's the Gray, I think, had gone through that, if I'm not mistaken. He had plowed through like 4 or 5 sets or something like that. I think that's right. I might be making.
Yeah, they have some massive flaw, like the previous Power Beats. But and then we also had people write in to tell me, because I had said on that show, like, I really loved the pairing style, like the AirPods pairing style that these new headphones had, and that I really wished Apple would make full-size over-ear headphones with that, like as is rumored. And a number of people wrote in to point out that they do make full-size headphones with the, not the new H1 chip from the AirPod 2s, but they do make Beats Studio headphones, which are indeed over-ear full-size headphones that have the AirPods 1 chip, the W1, in them. So that was good to hear. I have not had a chance to try them because, beach life. But ultimately, I think at this point, I would wait until the version 2 because the version 2 chip is so much better, like, all the faster pairing and the Hey Dingus stuff and everything. So at this point, I will wait for version 2 before I try that. But it's good to know that they actually already do make basically the product I was asking for. We are sponsored this week by Lumen 5. Go to lumen5.com/ATP to get a 50% discount off your first month. So, those like thumb stopping videos that you just have to watch when you're on social media? Have you ever wanted to make videos that were that catchy, that visually catchy, that good? Lumen 5 makes this easy and fun to do. Lumen 5's AI and machine learning make it easy to make these kind of videos in minutes. It can be used to create videos from anything from your blog to your small business. You can customize your videos to match the look and feel of your company. And what it does is you feed Lumen 5 an article, a blog post, with any kind of text message, and then the Lumen 5 AI helps you summarize your content and automatically find video and photo clips to make into a video. And they have a library of millions of free media files available to users, giving you access to everything you need to produce these kind of attention-grabbing style videos super easily in minutes. So start creating your thumb-stopping, attention-grabbing videos today. Lumen 5 has a special offer for us. Go to lumen5.com/ATP. That's the word lumen and the number 5. So lumen5.com/ATP. And you will get 50% off your first month with that special link. Once again, lumen5.com/ATP for 50% off. Thank you to Lumen 5 for sponsoring our show.
Apple may be bankrolling original podcasts, Spotify style, and trying to kind of dip their toe in the podcasting water by funding podcasts. So this broke midday yesterday as we record, and it was Mark Gurman and Lucas Shaw. And apparently Apple is, like I said, going to fund podcasts according to them. What do we think about this, Marco?
Oh, boy. This is messy. We've talked a lot about the whole idea of podcast platforms having proprietary lockdown content that's only available on their platform, usually through some kind of paid plan. And I think most of what we have said would still apply to this. The huge difference here is that Apple has, by most estimates, about 60% of the market share of podcast players. The next biggest player after that is Spotify at around 10%. So, and then everything below Spotify is like 3%, 2%. So it drops off very quickly after Apple. And Apple is the big player that matters the most. Spotify matters a little, and everyone else like me and everyone else doesn't matter that much in the grand scheme of things. It really is a different animal when talking about this kind of concept when it's Apple doing it compared to anyone else doing it. So that being said, having some kind of exclusive podcast to the Apple Podcast app, it has the potential for some really negative effects on the podcast ecosystem, but ultimately I don't think it will play out that way. I don't see a lot of podcasts saying will be exclusive to Apple because for all the reasons we've said it for other things, like if you go to Apple, like if an existing high demand show goes to Apple, you could say, yeah, they have 60% of market share, but you could also say they only have 60% market share. So, like, if you are an average show, which we aren't, but so it's our discussion would be very different if they came to us with a truckload of money. We would actually we'd have a bigger problem on our hands here. But for most shows, this proposition would basically be, hey, do you want to lose 40% of your audience and come work for us, basically. 60% is enough that this kind of thing is a scary potential for bad effects, but it's also not so much that we can assume it would be successful for them. And their market share over the last few years is going down, not up, as more clients take more share from them and as the audience grows in places that aren't Apple, like Spotify. So on one hand, I don't see a lot of big shows jumping on this because I don't think they'd be willing to lock out or lose such a big chunk of their audience that isn't on Apple Podcasts. And once you put up a paywall, right now 60% of the people use Apple Podcasts, but how many of them will pay? Assuming this, let's assume for the sake of argument that this is Podcasts Plus, and it's another $10 a month Apple service, or whatever it is. They keep adding all these plus services that are probably going to be around $10 a month. Let's assume that's what it is. Pick your price; it doesn't really matter. The fact is, it's probably a paid service that Apple wants people to subscribe to, right? So if they do this, you're not going to get 60% of your audience. You're going to get like 1% of your audience, because the other 59% who are using Apple Podcasts won't pay, and then the 40% who aren't there can't even have it as an option. So I don't think it would be wise for most shows to sign up for this. Now, they could be developing original shows. That's a different story. That has different math and different effects. That's probably more of what they're going to be doing because, as I said, it doesn't make a lot of sense for any existing successful show to take themselves and go behind a paywall. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Strategically, money-wise, everything. It's not a good idea. So that's probably not going to happen very often. So if you go to the idea of they're going to be developing original content and funding that, then that's fine. I think that would play out similarly to such efforts on Spotify and on Stitcher Premium and on places like Audible, places that have originals, exclusive originals that were developed for them, by them, behind some kind of paywall. Those do okay for some of those platforms, but they don't really affect the outside world of podcasting. They don't have enough traction, seemingly, to really affect everyone else. So this probably how this is going to play out. Apple News Plus has not killed anything, except maybe the usefulness of the Apple News app. But besides that, Apple News Plus, which I think would be a very similar approach, hasn't really done anything. It hasn't set the world on fire. It hasn't taken off that well. It hasn't really been a great or a terrible thing for anybody. It's just kind of too small of a splash to matter. That same scale of effect is probably what's going to happen here. They're probably going to have some big names. They're probably going to come out the door with some kind of premium thing, and they'll get some usage, but I'm guessing it will go just like everyone else's paid exclusive originals and not really move the needle for those of us, who aren't in that world. And for this area of podcasting, the kind of tech and Apple news, anybody listening to this show you probably won't even notice this kind of stuff. Because first of all, most of you aren't using Apple Podcasts. Unlike the general purpose podcast market, most people who listen to shows like this don't use Apple Podcasts. It's a much smaller market share. And so you won't even see these shows. You won't even hear about them. And if Apple does something to make their own client more attractive to people, it probably isn't going to work very well on our listeners that listen to this kind of show. So I don't think it's going to really affect us much, if at all. Except it'll give us a few show topics to talk about. But setting that aside, I don't think it's going to really do much. It's probably not going to go very far, and it probably isn't going to affect us even if it does go a little bit far. But setting all that aside, this certainly does bring up an interesting discomfort that as Apple transitions into a company that cares a lot more about services and is seeking much stronger revenue and strong revenue growth from services, they're looking around. They're poking around the company saying, "Hey, where can we rustle up some more services revenue? Hey, podcast division over there. We haven't talked to you in a while. Hey, can we extract a monthly fee out of you? Can we get that somehow? Can we get people to pay you a few dollars a month here and there?" There's a lot of incentives now that Apple has that are at odds with a lot of its previous ideals or previous behavior. Things like doing things that are best for the customer. That changes when you sell iCloud backup space by the month, stuff like that. There's all these weird incentives they now have that are counter to we just want to make the best products for everybody. So as they push more into the services narrative and services as a major growth engine for money, this kind of stuff is going to keep happening. I worry what that means for podcasting because so far they have been such a good kind of neutral steward of their massive power in the world of podcasting. If it weren't for Apple's basically benevolent neglect of the world of podcasting, it wouldn't be what it is today. Podcasting would not exist the way it does today. It would not be this good. It would not be this big. It would not be this healthy. And it would certainly not be this open if Apple was actively involved in maximizing everything about podcasting for themselves. It would not be what it is today. And we really have them to thank for where it is. Like, we have their incredible benevolent neglect and mostly hands-off leadership of their massive market share. And their open directory, well, their semi-open directory that we all kind of use. We have them to thank for where we are now because of all that stuff. And we just been assuming all this time, well, Apple really hasn't made significant moves in podcasting. They probably never will. So when people like me would talk about things like, market share diversity and client diversity and how important it is to have more podcast apps out there was this giant sitting on the side with 60, 70, 80% market share. And I wasn't worried about them because they were doing all the right things and they didn't seem to really care. And they were doing all the right things for like a decade or more. And so it didn't seem like they were ever going to be a threat to this open ecosystem and this wonderful medium that we all love. So the fact that they're now seemingly making a move that is kind of dipping a toe in the water in that direction, that is concerning merely because of their scale. That's kind of the pessimist take there, and I do worry about that, and I am going to be watching this closely. This could turn bad real fast, depending on what they do and how they do it.
I have the optimist take for you. What I was thinking of, like, what's the best case scenario?
I mean, the best case scenario is this kind of doesn't go anywhere and it fizzles out and we keep doing things the way we've been doing them.
Well, no, not the best case scenario for how it turns out. Best case scenario for their motivations, because if looked at through the lens of a company that has the track record that Apple has with podcasts, the most charitable attribution and motivation could be Apple, has done what it's done with podcasts. Apple sees what we all see, which is, the luminaries and the Spotifys of the world coming for podcasting. And, they're throwing money at it and getting exclusives and putting up paywalls and vending their own clients. And from Apple's perspective, presumably there is some, that they didn't accidentally treat podcasting the way they've treated it for like 10, 15 years. Like, it wasn't an accident. It wasn't like nobody noticed. It was, part of a conscious strategy, which is having podcasts more or less the way Apple made them by keeping them open and diverse, and having their player be the most popular player makes Apple's devices more valuable, because if you get one of these things, whether it be an iPod or an iPhone or whatever it has been over the years, one of the things you can do with it besides, text people and watch movies and YouTube and listen to music is also you can listen to podcasts, right? And these other companies employing their strategies and throwing money at it is a threat to basically a benefit of Apple's products, because Apple has lots of situations where, they make the product, but there's some dominant non-Apple third-party force that controls a major part of the ecosystem. Examples are YouTube, Facebook, Netflix, companies that aren't Apple, that at various times Apple butts heads with, but that are an essential part of the value proposition of Apple's products. Because if you buy an Apple device and you can't use Netflix on it, that's bad for Apple. And same thing with Facebook, same thing with YouTube. And those companies have at various times exerted that power in ways that Apple has been uncomfortable with. So I don't think Apple would be super happy if Spotify became the YouTube of podcasts, or if Luminary was greatly successful. So most charitably, you could say Apple sees this happening and says, we need to defend podcasting. And the way we can defend it is by doing more or less what they're doing. Throw money at it, get original things, like basically the old Microsoft strategy of, we have more money, time, and resources than you do. So we're just going to do the same thing you do, more or less the same way, maybe not as well, but who really cares? And we'll just wait for you to run out of money and wait for your VCs to run out of patience, because we can do this all day, just like Captain America. And then once that happens, they just go back to, okay, and now podcasting continues to be a safe, neutral thing that is a benefit to our products, and we don't have to worry about getting YouTubed or Netflixed. I'm not saying this is the most likely scenario, but it is at least plausible. And the reason I think it's plausible is that, honestly, I think if the service revenue people came around and said, can we get money out of that? Someone would do the math and say, not really. Like, it's just podcasting. And I know it seems big, but in the grand scheme of things, it's like, an ant's fart in the app store of like 3 days worth of revenue. Like, it's nothing. It's nothing compared to the big businesses like music, movies, games, and the whole rest of the App Store. I don't know if that's true. That's kind of like my sort of gut reaction, is that podcasting is as big as it may be on Apple scale. It's just like, yeah. So I give it a less than 50% chance that their motivation is purely charitable and they're just defending podcasting, but I'm not willing to entirely rule it out just because of the people who are in charge and the fact that it makes sense that Apple doesn't want that to happen to podcasting. It's bad for Apple if that happens. And like you said, Margot, like, honestly, their chances, I don't think they have any illusions about, unlike Luminary and perhaps Spotify, I don't think they have any particular illusions about this amazing upside of them dominating podcasting, mostly because Apple has dominated podcasting and they have not reached for that massive upside, probably because it doesn't exist. And so I'm really hoping that this is a mostly defensive move that won't, that will stave off the competitors that we think have worse motivations, but that will not turn into, Apple going all podcast evil on us. And the second aspect of this is about if they tried to go help podcast evil, how this strategy, it's, you said a million reasons, Mark, about why it's probably not going to be successful. I have another reason why Apple might think it's going to be successful, but why it's a little bit different. So the thing I kept thinking of with all of their Plus stuff or whatever is their one product that doesn't have a plus after the name, their one service product that doesn't have a plus, which is Apple Arcade, where they pay people to make games for iOS and all their other devices. And it's like, why would Apple, we talk about this when we talk about Apple, okay, why would Apple do this? People already make games for all their devices. Why would they pay people to do it and then charge a subscription and distribute that subscription based on how much you play and blah, 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 like the whole model. Like, why would they bother doing that? What's the point? And I feel like the point of Apple Arcade is there is an ecosystem for games on Apple devices, but that ecosystem is lacking in ways that Apple cares about. The first way it's lacking is that a lot of those developers don't support like all the lesser devices. Oh, you don't support Apple TV, you don't support the Mac. Yeah, of course, nobody does. It's ridiculous. But Apple would like you to do that. So one way they can make that happen is by giving you money to say, okay, now will you support Apple TV? Sure, I guess. Yeah, sure, pay me. But the second thing is the games that are dominating the App Store tend to have these exploitive mechanics and these free-to-play things that extract money from you in exchange for like the mechanics that withhold the fun until you pay them more money and have these subscriptions and all this other stuff, right? And how can Apple stop that from happening? They've built the App Store such that is the apex predator. They can change the ecosystem by saying, what if we pay you to make a game and we'll give you a bunch of money, but you can't put it in-app purchases. It has to be you just buy a game and you play it and it's fun and that's it. So they can shape the market with their money to make a new thing that hasn't previously existed, make that become successful. Podcasting, on the other hand, is not suffering from a blight of free-to-play podcasts that exploit these mechanics or whatever. Like, you could argue that wouldn't it be great if your podcast didn't have ads? And lots of these companies have argued that, like, oh, our podcasts are great, they don't have ads. It's like, podcasts with ads are not the same thing as like casinos for kids that extract money from you and delay these mechanics and make you buy coins to get energy to be able to continue. Like, it's not even close. I don't think people who are listening to podcasts today are particularly upset about how they're being exploited by free podcasts. I think it's a trade-off that most people are more or less happy with and have been happy with when it was called public radio, despite the fact that during, Pledge Drive month, it would drive people crazy. But other than that, and we have that in podcast world too, it's a relationship that makes some kind of sense and that you don't hear stories about a kid losing $3,000 and then having to complain to Apple to get their money back. You don't hear all these, problems of like buying a game and feeling like you haven't, or downloading a game and feeling like you haven't actually gotten anything and not realizing how much you have to keep paying. Like, that's not how podcasts work today. So the podcast ecosystem is not in as desperate need of a new thing that can only exist when Apple throws money at it. So by Apple throwing money at this, I think what they're going to get, best case scenario, is a bunch of good podcasts. And probably that's what Spotify can get. Give people a bunch of money and they make a bunch of good podcasts. And so Spotify will have some good podcasts that are only on Spotify. Apple will have some good podcasts that are only on Apple's player. And there's a subscription model and blah, blah, blah. But I don't think that fundamentally changes the nature of the ecosystem. Unlike Apple Arcade, where if that came to exist and be a subscription, it would feel so much different than the Wild West of the App Store where everything's free to play. if you subscribe to Apple Arcade, you would be having a, qualitatively different experience than if you didn't subscribe. Whereas if you subscribe to one of these podcast services, it's like, well, do you care about any of those podcasts or do you not? But either way, these shows don't have ads, but who cares? I barely notice that. The ads are such a small percentage of the time, and it's not a thing that bothers me or whatever. So I hope this is a defensive maneuver on Apple's part. I also hope they don't expect it to, change the landscape or go gangbusters, because honestly, the value that they're adding to podcasting is small. The defensive value is perhaps large because you're basically staying on equal footing and not allowing Spotify or Luminary to, on the off chance that they start to snowball, you're not allowing them to have the leg up on you, because it's like, look, we're all like this, and this is the player you're already using already, so the playing field is level again, and you probably don't care about these podcasts anyway, so just ignore all of this. That is my uncharacteristically optimistic dream scenario, is that we'll get a couple of good podcasts that Apple pays for. It will stave off the competitors, but the landscape will stay more or less the same. Remind me of my brief deluded optimism 3 years from now. And I did say it was less than 50% chance, but I'm not willing to dismiss it as ridiculous.
So just before we get all of the commentary and questions, if Apple came to the three of us and said, here's $1 billion a piece, would you take it and take your just peerless a podcast over to our Podcast Plus? I think we can all agree that for $1 billion a piece, we would say yes.
Of course.
I mean, everyone has a price.
Everyone has a price. We all have prices. But the thing is, no one's going to pay our price because we are not, it's like Marco said, why would you take an existing show and convince them to reduce their audience? You would just pay famous people, actual famous people, to make a new thing that isn't available anywhere. It's such a straightforward strategy. When Apple did its TV service, they didn't buy Friends or The Office, although arguably maybe they should have. They paid a bunch of money for people to make new shows. That's your value proposition, unique things. And no one is happy about having something that's unique by taking something that wasn't unique and hoarding it just to yourself. That just makes everybody sad. So that's not going to happen. And anyway, Apple wouldn't be going after tech podcasts. They'd be going after, comedians or
Oprah.
Yeah, exactly. Oprah. Look at who Steven Spielberg and Oprah are on stage. We were not. So it lets you know that's the level that Apple's playing at.
Don't sell yourself short, John. Everyone would love it if we showed up on stage. Everyone, even the people who have never heard of us.
Everyone listening to this podcast would, and everyone else would say, "Where's Oprah?"
No way, man.
Do I get a car?
For $1 billion a piece, maybe we will buy a few listeners some cars.
We'll buy you a car podcast. Can I interest anyone in a car podcast?
Oh, there it is.
There we go.
Maybe that's the way I'll finally get my dream of bringing Neutral back. Is they back truckloads of money.
Apple will pay for it. There you go.
For $1 billion, I would do Neutral again.
As would I.
You hear that, Apple? You hear that?
It would be a shorter show if we would just list the things that we would not do for $1 billion.
Yeah, right.
That's also true. I can't even imagine what this show would have to do differently if Apple brought a whole pile of money to us and we legitimately did take it. Again, this would never happen. It would never happen. But, just for the sake of thinking about it, I don't know if we could continue to do this show as it exists if Apple was paying for it, because even if we complained about Apple, as we do from time to time.
Us? We complain?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, I feel like even if we were complaining in this hypothetical world where Apple owns us, then people would be, oh, you're just saying that so you don't sound biased. And really, you just do whatever Apple tells you to do.
But we wouldn't care because we'd be billionaires. So there's that.
Touche. That's a fair point. I really do think, and people have asked me, and I think you guys as well in the past, why don't you just go work for Apple? And I mean, aside from the fact that I'm not necessarily keen on picking up my family and moving across the country, especially to a state that's about to fall off the country, everything about my life would have to change. Literally everything about my life except my family would have to change. And it's just...
Including you wouldn't be able to do the show. There's exactly. One thing of Apple paying for your pocket, but the rule that Apple has is if you're an employee, you don't get to do shows like this.
Yeah.
You just don't. So... that's even worse. Going to work for Apple would be worse than if they just paid for the show. Because if they paid for the show, yes, it's a clear conflict of interest. But if you just stated up the front, people could decide whether they want to bother listening to a show that's paid for by Apple or not, right? But if you go to work for Apple, there's no show.
Yeah, exactly right. So please don't go running to Apple, you two, because I know I'm not.
I don't think Marco was a flight risk.
Yeah, that's not going to happen. We are sponsored this week by Squarespace. Start building your website today at squarespace.com and enter offer code ATP at checkout to get 10% off. Now, I have a real awesome true story about Squarespace this week. There is a website that I have to get info from on a regular basis from a local organization. It was made, I don't know, in the 1950s or something, and the people who run it say they can't put information up there fast enough because they have to email some contractor to put it up there. They can't do it themselves. I said, you know what, let me fix this for you. I went on Squarespace, made the entire site, remade their site. It took only a few hours, and this is a complex site. There were probably 150 different documents to upload for various PDF links. There were probably 25, 30 pages in the site. There's an events calendar. There's an image gallery. I just replicated on Squarespace. It took maybe 3 or 4 hours one night. I showed it to them, and I just handed them the login info. It's still in free trial mode. I didn't give them a credit card or anything. Still free trial mode, and I said, here, take this if you want it. If you don't, no problem. And the great thing is then I'm out of the picture. They can update stuff themselves, and if they need any help, Squarespace offers direct support with all the plans. It's amazing. So you can see for yourself how great this is. I gotta say, I was blown away by how great I was able to make this website in one evening. They were quoted a price to modernize their website with a private contractor of $40,000, and Squarespace costs a lot less than that. So see for yourself, get this done for somebody, rescue somebody's old website from the Stone Ages for them, and hand it off to them and say, here, if you want it, here you go, at squarespace.com/ATP. When you sign up or when they sign up, make sure to go back there, squarespace.com/ATP, and use offer code ATP to get 10% off your first purchase. Once again, squarespace.com/ATP, code ATP. Make your next move with Squarespace.
Oh, man. But you know who Marco does want to work for? Marco wants to work for Dropbox.
Oh, God.
Can I just say, what bullshit just happened to my computer today? Because I was reading Twitter and I saw you're complaining about how Dropbox suddenly appeared in your dock. And I thought to myself, surely that can't be a widespread thing. Surely that wouldn't happen to my computer. And sure enough, when I arrive at my iMac, guess what's in my dock?
Oh, my God. And the window's up, too. That's the best part. The window shows itself.
So angry.
Oh, man. Dropbox. Every so often, Dropbox does something that annoys me, and I look around at solutions to dump it. And I think this time I'm really in. This time I've really had enough. Because what they've shown me, and forgive me, I tweeted about this earlier, so if you've seen it already, forgive the repetition. What Dropbox has shown a number of times over the last couple of years, from various things like the accessibility permission, the fake permission dialogues they presented, like system dialogues to capture your root password and stuff like that. Dropbox has shown they can't really be trusted to have good judgment with the amount of power they have over my computer. Dropbox runs as a user process on my computer. I think it's just a user process. I hope it isn't root, but it probably is. Who knows? I bet some part of it is probably root. But it runs as a user process. It has access to all of the user files that I have, because it runs as use and it's not sandboxed, so it has access to all of your files. And it runs automatically updating software. It automatically self-updates whenever it feels like it. That's an incredible amount of access. That's an incredible amount of power it has and access it has to my stuff. And so for a company that has that kind of access and that kind of power to repeatedly show poor judgment of how it wields that power and what it should do to my computer and what kind of power it should have and take and how much it wants to get in my way and pop up dialogues when I plug cameras in and stuff like that, it has shown me that I shouldn't trust it anymore. It has shown me that it is not worthy of trusting it with the power it has, the immense power it has on my computer. So now, more than ever, I am looking to remove Dropbox from my life, and we'll see how that goes.
You were comparing it when you were tweeting about it to or someone compared it about it in that they're comparing it to Twitter. And I think the motivation behind both Twitter's changes that we all hated and Dropbox changes that we're all hating is the same. It's two businesses that started with a particular model that users like, trying to figure out how they're going to be a business that, makes the money back for all their VCs or whatever. With Twitter, it was like, we can't we don't think we can charge people, so we have to figure out how to make money as an advertising platform. We need to take control of the clients and drive engagement with an algorithmic timeline and all these things that we hate, blah, blah, blah. And Dropbox, the old complaint is like, if you just make a folder that syncs, that's not enough. You have to be enterprisey. You have to take over search. You have to become the gateway for all files across an entire organization and do all these things features that we don't care about, because the business thinks to be as successful as the business wants to be, you can't just be a folder that syncs. That's a great way to get off the ground, but eventually you need to become essentially Microsoft Office and Exchange all rolled into one, or, you have to have the complete suite of things. Like, that seems to be sort of the end game of all these things that sell to businesses. Like, you have to be able to have an email system, a calendaring system, a document sharing system, collaborative editing of word processing documents, spreadsheets, cloud drive service, a real-time Slack-style chat thing, a thing that you can use for teleconferencing and calls. You need all of those things. Yeah. And Microsoft has all of those things, and the things they didn't have, they cloned, right? Slack has some of those things. Like, I think I remember when Slack added video calling. It's like, video calling to Slack. It's like, of course. They need that checklist that I just went down. Everybody needs all of those things. So if you're Dropbox, you're like, well, all I've got is the cloud drive. I need to add a bunch of those things right away. How many things can we start adding? And so you take your folder that syncs and you start adding, document search and collaboration, and how long before Dropbox has something where you can do video calls to each other? It's only a matter of time, right? Either these companies get bought by one of those other big things, like Google has a complete suite of that. Apple sort of has most of that suite, albeit spread out in a strange way. But really, it's between Google and Microsoft selling to corporations. And then Slack and Dropbox are like these smaller fish that are around the side, where in general they have better products. Like, Slack is better than Microsoft Teams, right? Dropbox is arguably better than, OneDrive or whatever, or what the hell is Microsoft things called, or Google Drive for that matter, or at least was, right? But the people who are running these businesses says, is this a tenable long-term strategy? Can we just be just the chat thing or just the drive thing? And the answer when it comes to business is probably not, because the big companies are like, don't pay money to Dropbox for them to do your cloud drive. We have a cloud drive, and we'll bundle it with Office and Exchange and all this other stuff, and Office Online and blah, blah, blah. Don't pay other vendors to use. Yes, their product may be better. They wouldn't say that, but their product may be better. But look how much cheaper it is if you just buy this one bundle that has everything from us. And Dropbox can't offer that. They can say, well, we can lower our price, but we can't give you a bundle that does everything. We're trying to win on quality. And if you try to win on quality in the enterprise, that is not a winning strategy, because we established before the definition of enterprise software, the people who pay for the software and select it are not the people who use it. So your software being more desirable for users means almost nothing in the enterprise. All that matters is, does it do the things that I need it to do? Does it check all the checkboxes for compliance and blah, blah, blah? And how much does it cost? And so the slow destruction of Dropbox mirrors the slow destruction of Twitter. It's two companies trying to be more than they started out as, trying to find a way to make a viable business that can be the unicorn that everyone thought they were. And the only way to do that is to start adding features that users don't want, but that in theory help you to make more money. And whether that actually helps them, whether Dropbox thinks they're going to become a replacement for the Google suite or the Microsoft suite, I don't know, but it's clearly the path they're traveling. And it's like Twitter was like, are they going to hit a breaking point where they make their clients so bad that everybody leaves? It seems like they hit the critical mass breaking point, that at least they have sort of a break even, to use Fusion parlance, reaction going on, where Twitter is not going to collapse under the weight of their terrible clients, because if it was going to do that, it would have already. It still might collapse under the weight of other things, but for now, it seems somewhat self-sustaining and has gotten probably as gross as it's going to get until the next, until they reach for the next big leap. Dropbox, on the other hand, it's unclear whether them slowly making their product worse for users is something they can afford to do, because there are a lot of competitors. Some of them are platform owners, like Microsoft has their built-in thing and Apple has its built-in thing. If the competitors can reach competence, it could be that Dropbox starts to fade before it can get that critical mass of enterprise contracts or whatever they're shooting for.
It's bad, man. I don't know. The more time goes on, and it's only been in the last, I want to say year, not even 2 years, but in the last year particularly, they have just taken everything that I like about the Dropbox client and ruined it. And I think it's clear that, as you were saying, John, I mean, I am no longer Dropbox's customer. And so that's okay, but it's a real bummer. And so I think my plan is to really push for myself and my co-hosts, who are the people I most frequently use Dropbox with, to all move to iCloud Drive once we're all on Catalina. And that's, reasonably straightforward and easy to do, because in Catalina, many people have noted, including Marco via Twitter, that in Catalina they are supposedly adding shared folders, which is the one big thing that I think many of us are actually missing from iCloud Drive. Again, we're not missing a work chat or anything like that. We're just missing the fact that we can't share folders. And once we can share folders, then I think I'm going to try to phase Dropbox out of my life very, very aggressively.
So the other options people have mentioned is that you can use Dropbox through without having the Dropbox software installed. Obviously, there's the web interface if that's what you want to do, but also file transfer applications like Transmit can interact with Dropbox. So you can just totally uninstall the Dropbox software, not have to deal with their software at all, and still be able to essentially take advantage of the network effect of like, oh, everybody's on Dropbox, and we've always used Dropbox, so we can continue to use it. So that's a possibility. Having used, I think, every cloud drive thing, I have to say that Dropbox still is the least problematic in terms of actually making the files go to the place where they're supposed to go successfully with the fewest number of conflicts. That's, the kernel of reliability that is in the middle of this giant cloud of nagging software. And by the way, even when you are the customer, like I'm not a business and I use like the personal version of Dropbox, it is constantly telling me, your Dropbox is almost full. You want to upgrade to more storage? And like, there's no way to stop it from saying that. Like, I know I am close to my limit. I understand I could pay more money for more storage. But instead, I just want to sort of maintain with this, whatever, 5% free space. And yet the cost of having 5 to 10% free space is just constant nags. Like, once every other day, at least, sometimes multiple times in a day, it tells me, you're running out of space. And it's like, great. Thanks, Dropbox. I just love dismissing these dialog boxes. And I'm like, that's not an enterprise feature. It knows that I'm a person, because the enterprise would just buy a huge amount of space, and the enterprise version wouldn't bug the individuals. It would bug like the administrator or whatever, tell them that they're running out of space, right? So even for its just plain old individual users using Dropbox, it's getting super aggressive about, trying to get me to spend more money. And I say, no, I will just delete some files. And that's what I'm saying. I don't want to delete files. Like, I think this percentage of free space, I made that joke about it when Synology sent me an email and it said, space on volume whatever is getting dangerously low, and there was only 500 gigs free. Like, using percentages for free space, it's not always the wisest thing. And I understand things start to go badly if you fill it up. But like, in terms of Dropbox, it's a totally artificial limit. I'm not actually filling a disk somewhere. Even if I was 99%, I don't want to hear about it until I'm 100%. That's when Dropbox can tell me my thing is full. Until then, I don't want to hear about it.
We are sponsored this week by Hullo, buckwheat pillows. I gotta say, buckwheat pillows are really cool. They are totally different than the regular like soft pillows that we are used to. It's kind of like a beanbag full of these buckwheat hulls, which I guess the size of them is it's almost like a marble size, or a little bit smaller than that. And so it allows you to adjust its shape and thickness, and because it's beanbag-like, then it stays there. So you can move and support it however you want it to be supported, for your head and neck and wherever else, and then it stays there. It supports you exactly the way you want to be supported. It doesn't squish throughout the night, and it also doesn't really get hot, which is great in the summertime, because buckwheat tends to breathe better. There's airflow that can get in there between the hulls, so it really doesn't get hot or sticky or anything. I gotta say, this thing is really cool. It's totally different. I had one for a little while, and then my wife stole it, so now I have to get another one because she likes it a lot. It's really incredibly supportive. And you can also customize how it feels. You can add or remove fill. You can just open up the side, and you can adjust the thickness by adding or removing it. You can also remove all the fill, so you can wash the case fully. And they sell like refills of the fill from their website too. This actually isn't that new of an idea. People have been doing this for centuries, the buckwheat pillows. It was more popular outside the U.S., especially in Japan. But now we're getting it here in the U.S. It's really a more natural way to sleep. And it's made in the USA with quality construction materials, certified organic cotton case. The buckwheat is grown and milled in the United States. And there's fast, free shipping on every order. You can sleep on it for 60 nights. And if it's not right for you, send it back for a full refund. So go to hullopillow.com/ATP. If you try more than one, you get a discount of the $20 per pillow depending on the size. And once again, fast free shipping on every order, and 1% of all their profits are donated to the Nature Conservancy. This is a pretty cool company. HulloPillow.com/ATP. That's HULLO pillow.com/ATP. Thank you so much to Hullo Pillow for supporting my neck during sleep and for sponsoring our show.
All right, would you like to do some Ask ATP?
Let's do it.
We begin tonight with Josh Lewis, who writes, on what have you placed more stickers, your car or your iPad? And I thought that this kind of leads to a perhaps more interesting corollary question, which is, do you guys have any stickers on your cars? So let me start with Marco, and I will go last. Marco, do you have stickers on your iPad, and do you have any in your car, and which one has more?
So one question is, are we counting things like registration stickers that have to go on the windshield?
No.
Okay. So if we rule out required stickers for regulatory reasons and like parking permits and things like that, then I have one sticker on my car. So I have a fish sticker on the back windshield, right in the lower center part of it. It is blocked from my view by the center rear seat headrest, so it does not reduce visibility at all, but it still advertises to the world that I enjoy fish, and I kind of enjoy that. That's the only sticker I have that's not a parking sticker or a registration sticker. And then on my iPad...
But before you get to your iPad, you forgot the other most important feature of that fish sticker. It lets you pick out your Tesla among the 5,000 other red Teslas in the town where you live. So when you go into the parking lot, you're not lost in this maze of Teslas. You're like, oh, there's mine. It's the one with the fish sticker.
Exactly. It's all for practicality. On my iPad, technically I have 0 stickers because the one sticker that I have is not on the iPad. It's on the keyboard cover.
Oh, come on.
On the keyboard cover is one sticker. It is the Apple logo sticker so it kind of looks like an Apple laptop when you are using it, like just right in the middle, centered on the back of the keyboard cover. But it's the sticker from the October event last fall, which was my first invited press event, and that meant a lot to me. And they gave special stickers that were at that event, and it's one of those stickers.
Is it upside down or right side up when it's in the folded mode? Like which orientation did you go with?
It is the modern version, so it's upside down, or it's right side up when it's up in use, when you see it from the back, just as a modern Apple laptop would be.
Yeah, they gave us a package of something like 5 stickers. I have one of those on the front of the keyboard cover. If you're holding it in landscape, it's at the bottom left, and mine is like a bluish and purple. And like I said, they had given us a package of 5, and I figure I'll just use them over time on iPads or something like that. John, what about your cars and iPads and things?
Can I go out on a limb here and say 0 on both?
I would agree with you, but let's hear it for real.
So I do have 0 stickers on my cars. Also 0 magnets. My wife tried to put a magnet on her car, and I said, we're not that kind of family. You know the magnets, right?
Like the ribbons and stuff?
You see them, there's all sorts of ones. I think the one she was trying to put on was like a pet adoption one, like after we'd adopted our dog or whatever. But no magnets, no stickers, nothing on the car. But I have to say, the first car I ever owned, which I got from my parents, I did put a sticker on it when I sort of took ownership of it. I put a very small white Apple logo sticker on the back, driver's side rear quarter window thingy, right? Mm-hmm. And part of it was just hey, I like Apple, blah, blah, blah. But part of it was also to be able to identify my white Honda Civic among the sea of other white Honda Civics. If I couldn't see both sides of it, because you could easily pick it out because it was the one without a passenger side mirror.
Wait, I'm sorry. What color did you say it was?
It's white.
Really? I don't know if we knew this before.
Would you say that just happened to you?
My mother actually likes white cars. When she bought Acura Integra later, she chose white again.
Type R?
Second mode. No, it wasn't. It was just a regular Integra. Yeah, my brother got that car. It was better than the Civic, but he totally destroyed it. He left the sunroof open and let snow into the car. This is the level of destruction we're talking about.
Oh God,
that's pretty bad.
And that was later in life after. And so my iPad. No stickers. I'm not a sticker person. No stickers on my device. I was going to ask Marco: is the sticker that you put on your keyboard cover, is it actually straight and centered? I'm going to guess no.
It is straight. If you eyeball it, it is straight. It is not quite centered correctly.
It's not. It can't possibly be straight. That's the thing about the Apple logo. You think it's easy to line up and make it straight, but it's not. It's not a square. It's like it's all wavy and curvy. It's very easy to get it slightly crooked. I'm going to guess that it is. I mean, it's not as bad as Casey stickers, which are just horrendously placed, but it is really hard to actually get an Apple logo sticker. Unless you're laying it on top of, this is what a lot of people do at work, laying it on top of the one that Apple puts there, which is straight and centered. If you just have like a empty field on the back of a case or something, trying to put the Apple logo like visually centered and also straight is basically impossible. So, I mean, maybe it's off by an amount that you don't notice, but don't look at it too closely.
Got it.
So for me on my iPad, this is the first thing. I stickered my work computer actually because it wasn't mine, but this is the first device of my own that I've stickered. Into Marco's point, I haven't stickered the iPad itself, but rather the case. I have 10 different stickers on the front of it and 3 different stickers on the back of it, including a white Apple logo, horrifically twisted, not on purpose, and horrifically off-center, also not on purpose, to serve the same purpose as Marco had said, so it looks kind of like a laptop when it's open. On my car, I have I don't know if you would want to call it like the outline, but the shape of the Nürburgring in the back window all the way down on the left. I had the same basic thing on the BMW, which I had actually bought with Marco at a little gift shop at the Nürburgring. However, that went with it was kind of falling off at that point anyway, but it went with the car. And so I just ordered a new one off Amazon. And I consider it okay to have that on the car since I have, thanks to Marco, driven the Nürburgring one time hilariously slowly. So that is my situation. Eric New writes, you guys all seem to go for 256 gigs of storage on your phones. Do you come close to filling it? I have tons of apps and podcasts, and I'm not even using 50% of 128 gigs. I don't try to keep my whole camera roll on my phone, and I don't have any local music or videos, so maybe that's it? ? For me, I believe I have something like, where is this? This is in general, 80.5 gigs of 256 gigs, and I always buy a little bit bigger phone than I think I need just in case, especially now that 4K video is a thing. And isn't 4K at 60 frames a thing now?
Yep.
So that gets real big real quick. For me, I have 20 gigs of music that I have pulled onto my phone, 10 gigs of photos, and then a bunch of other miscellaneous and boring stuff after that. So I'm using, I don't know, what is this, like a third of my 256 gigs. Marco, you went first last time. John, what's your situation on your phone?
I saw this question earlier today. I was like, what are they talking about 256? I don't get 256 gig phones, but I wasn't entirely sure. I'm like, do I? Do I get 256 gig phones? So I looked it up on my phone. And sure enough, I have a 256 gig phone. I'm pretty sure this is my first one that's ever been 256 because I never really went for like the big storage. I just couldn't stomach the cost upgrade. But I've got one now apparently, and I'm using 96.6 gigabytes of 256. I'd been managing space on this, thinking that I had a 128. Like I didn't want to, be creeping up on it. And I think the reason I have that in mind is because I constantly fill my iPad. My iPad is always full. But my iPad is super old. Like it's the original iPad Pro, which is now several Pros old. And I think the iPad is 128 gigs. And also I download like video to watch offline frequently if I'm going to be going somewhere and don't want to have to deal with trying to stream it over a bad internet connection, and that fills up the space real fast. Or like, downloading movies from my Plex or whatever. So it's very easy to fill my iPad, and I'm constantly like deleting big games that I haven't used and managing my space. But on my phone, apparently I've got tons of headroom, so I should stop aggressively deleting stuff from Overcast and just let those things fill up. Overcast is my third largest app, by the way. But it's only 12 gigs. 12 gigs of podcasts are on my phone.
Marco.
I have a very similar situation as both of you. I do have the 256 gig phone. I'm using about 76 gigs at the moment. And so it feels weird. But then, so at first I thought, well, that was wasteful to get it. But then I looked, I'm like, wait, was there a 128 option? And it turns out, no, there isn't. Like, the options are 64 or 256 or even more.
No, that explains why I got 256, because 64 I would be way over the limit of. So
right.
Yeah.
So like a couple of phones ago, whenever they offered 128, I did get 128, but they don't offer that anymore. So I think I knew that 64 would be a little bit tight for what I wanted. Sure enough, that was true. So it does feel wasteful to have all this space for a phone that I know I'm only going to probably own for a year, and that I know for most of that year I'm going to be using less than half of it. But the next interval down would have been too small. So I see it as like not that I spent $150 extra to get to buy space I wasn't going to use, but rather I spent $150 to not have to manually manage any space ever during that year that I have this phone. So it doesn't feel great that I wish they would have offered a middle option on 128, and I would have gotten that, and it would have been less money possibly. But the fact is, we didn't have that option, so I took the next best one.
And I mean, I still think this is better than having 16 or even 32 gigs be the base. And then, I'd much rather be a little grumpy about going too high in the middle than being grumpy about the lowest tier being effectively nothing. So I don't think any of us are really complaining. Finally, Sarah Ann writes, I'm a teacher considering putting together a proposal for teaching computer science as part of the International Baccalaureate at my school. Program languages would be at my discretion. Which ones do you think are the most valuable / important for modern students? I have a really terrible answer for this, so I guess I'll go last. Marco, what do you think about that?
There's always this dilemma between languages that are easy to teach or languages that are that demonstrate important computer science concepts versus what languages are currently in use in the practical world. Because what the students probably want to learn is whatever language they need to make cool stuff that they can see in their current context, like on whatever devices people are using, whatever platforms people are using. The current language is always in demand by the students. What the professors usually want to teach is the more timeless concepts, the more fundamental things. So you might want to teach things like C that are kind of like underlying all this stuff, or you might want to teach things that have certain theoretical benefits, like Lisp to teach functional programming or things like that. So there's all these like competing factors. But I think ultimately, for getting people started, you need them to be motivated and to stick with it. And so I would put to the side the value of things like Lisp and theoretical benefit languages. Put that to the side. Save that for year 2 or 3 of their education. For year 1, stick to things that will get them engaged and will keep them motivated to keep going. And that is whatever is required to make the kind of things they want to make. So right now, that's probably going to be, in this order, Swift and then JavaScript.
John, I assume Perl is the answer.
My reading of this question is a little bit different because it's a proposal for teaching computer science, which is very different than a proposal for teaching people how to program or how to become programmers or anything like that. And so computer science is basically a math course practically. And so then I would say pick one of the languages that has the least things that are not important to the concept. So when you're teaching computer science and complexity theory and algorithms and data structures, those things you could teach just with a whiteboard, right? But you want them to have a program that they can write it out. Like a lot of algorithm books will have like pseudocode or whatever. So basically what you want is the programming language that is the most like pseudocode, so they don't have to worry about, this is, ideally you wouldn't have to worry about a type system. Certainly you wouldn't have to worry about pointers. You wouldn't have to worry about, native versus primitives versus objects, all sorts of concerns that are parts of real programming languages but are not part of computer science, right? Having to understand that this is an int and that's a primitive and this is an object and it's different and they behave in this way. I have to understand the difference between pointers and references in C++. None of that has anything to do with computer science. So those make poor languages to teach computer science. Arguably, like I said, you could teach computer science without a language. And I've taken courses that are like that, where you don't touch a computer, but it is a computer science course. But if you do want to touch a computer, I would pick whatever you think the best modern language is that has the least warts that will surface when teaching algorithms and data structures, right? So Swift is actually good in that regard. I've seen this as my son has been taking computer courses, and he's basically had to learn and use at various times Python, Swift, Java, and C++. And despite the fact that Swift is itself a very complicated and feature-rich language, if you're using it to learn data structures and algorithms, you don't have to touch any of the weird stuff. Like protocols are not going to come up in a class teaching complexity theory, right? It's just, you don't have to use it. You just need like assignment, conditionals, loops, functions. And if you're using Swift to do those things, you do have to deal with the type system, but type reference helps a little bit there. You don't have to deal with pointers. You don't have to deal with the strange warts of types that can't contain a value, and all sorts of weird things that you have to deal with in a low-level language, right? So I think Swift actually is a reasonably good language to teach computer science. You'll be using one tiny little corner of Swift. Like Python might be similar, but honestly, I think Python might actually have more weird warts and strange things related to it than Swift. So yeah, I think I'm basically going to end up agreeing with Marco, but for different reasons. That Swift is your number one, and then number two probably is JavaScript, because it's so pervasive. It lets you ignore types. JavaScript has way more warts in the basics than Swift, like the fact that all your integers are floats and that are 53 bits long or whatever, and that will come back to bite you, and the weird semantics around truth, and this JavaScript is a mess, right? But it's ubiquitous, and you can do all sorts of fun things with it. And if you're just going to do a bunch of algorithms, you can do that in JavaScript as well. I don't think, like, the real answer is talk to other people who are teaching a similar course, what they're using and how successful it is. But coming from people who have never taught a course in computer science but have taken them, Swift and JavaScript seem like a good place to start, and maybe I would throw in Python as a wild card.
It's funny. My first answer to this was JavaScript, because it's, the most pervasive. You can use it on almost any platform. It may or may not be elegant, but you can do it. But hearing you talk, John, particularly about, and I'm thinking about classes in JavaScript, which at last I've played with this, which has been a while, to be fair, is not really a thing, or it's so weird and esoteric.
And you don't have to deal with classes at all to do algorithms and data structures. You don't.
That's true. That's true.
Also, like comp sci, like intro to comp sci kind of stuff, you wouldn't really even need to get OO stuff in there.
That's a fair point. So I guess, and it's not Sarah's fault, because she was, writing a single tweet. So goodness knows, what the parameters are for this. But the way I read it was, let me teach you like the basic, and I think this is because I'm reflecting on my schooling in the early aughts, what's the basics of object-oriented programming, because that was, all the rage in the early aughts. Not to say that it's not a thing now, but, it was like slightly newish, kind of, sort of, and fancy at the time. In the way that I think functional programming is now. Functional programming isn't actually new, but it's just becoming trendy now. Well, anyways, so if you're trying to teach basics of OOP, then I would say either Python or possibly Swift. And if you're just trying to teach a person, more like what I suspect your son is dealing with, which is, how can you write code? And this is kind of what I think Marco was thinking of. I think JavaScript was my first answer, with Swift probably being second or third, and Python being the other one in the 2-3 category. But now, I don't know, hearing you guys talk, I really wasn't going to bring Swift to the top, but now I'm actually starting to think you're right, that Swift might be the best complete answer, as long as you don't mind hitching yourself to Apple's, wagon.
Well, but the fact is, like, a lot of these students will have Apple devices, and it is very motivating to be able to make something that you might actually enjoy and be able to run and use on your own device. Like, that is incredibly motivating. And when you're at the introductory level, keeping these students motivated and engaged and getting them to like push forward is so much more important than whatever specific things you're teaching them, because you have to, like, a lot of people dip into CS like as an experiment, or I might like this, I don't know, and so you have to keep them motivated to get a lot of them to stay and to remain engaged in the course. And so if it's something that they can make code that runs on their phone, they could make their own iPhone app, which their phone is certainly likely to be an iPhone. It isn't guaranteed for everybody, but it's certainly pretty high on the list. Then that has so much more value than any individual concept that you might teach in an introductory course.
People dump on Swift a lot as a learning language, because it's like, learning language, it's so complicated and there's so many weird features. And it's true, it's a big language and getting bigger all the time. But I maintain that it actually is a reasonable learning language, because the corner of the language that you need to use to learn the basics doesn't have a lot of sharp edges. Like, strings work in a normal way, numbers work in a normal way, Functions look like normal. There's not too much weird syntax in terms of parameter parsing, especially if you don't reveal the entire power of the parameter system. Like if you just stay in that little corner, simple things really are simple. Even the type system, which is a complexity that you don't really need to deal with to teach computer science, can be mostly hidden from you if you just do basic things. Even when you get into objects and stuff and, structs and like it's, in terms of all of the quote unquote popular languages, it has the fewest weird things if what you want to do is simple and straightforward because you're just learning. Like you're not interested in learning Swift, you're interested in learning computer science and you're learning it through Swift. It's the thing. It used to be an argument for Python, but Python is old enough now that it has I think Python didn't do a good job of cleaning up its mistakes during its evolution, like many of its sibling languages, including Perl and Ruby and all that stuff. They just kind of built stuff on, and then they did the Python 2 to 3 transition. There's lots of weird warts in Python that to explain, you have to be like, okay, well, let me tell you the history of Python and why this is like this. And we have a new way to do it, but the old way's still there and it works. And the new way is a little bit weird because we couldn't interfere with the old way. You don't have to make those explanations for the most part with Swift. It's part of the benefit of all of the breaking they've done of source compatibility over the years. It's like they make a mistake, they're like erase, try again. Okay, erase, try again. And they're still, towards the edges of the language and the complexities, it's fiendishly difficult to understand all the nuances. But for the basics, it is. I think it is a pretty good learning language. To give an example, when my son was using it, he wasn't using it to write anything having to do with Apple platforms. In fact, he was initially writing Swift into a web page, and that web page would compile it for you on the back end and show you the result. And it was like doing a basic program. You could take, text input from the terminal essentially, and you could print things. And that was in the introductory course. All you would do is add numbers together, make data structures, take input from the keyboard, print values. There was nothing Apple about it. Like I said, it was in a web page. Eventually, I got him to use Xcode because doing your coding in a web page is not ideal. But there is, even though they're not using Apple devices, there is still the benefit of saying, oh, and by the way, this is the actual language people use, ***, to write applications for your phone and your iPad. And like, wow, like they feel like they're not wasting their time. Like, I know Swift, and they don't know Swift. Like they know a tiny corner of Swift that have really no idea how to use it at all. And they don't realize that what you really need to know to write phone apps is not the language, but the API, which is so much harder to get your mind around than the language. But I think it has done its job as a teaching language. And apparently, my son was telling me that the AP computer science test is all in Java still. So like you're faced with, I'm not sure what the goal of this particular course is, but in the US anyway, if you're going to take the AP computer science test, you better know Java because that's what they're going to test you on, which is kind of a shame because Java does have all sorts of warts that are not relevant to to computer science as a concept, but are very relevant to Java as a particular language. And who cares about that?
Yeah, Java is actually what I learned. Like it was what my CS 101 and 102 were taught in the year 2000. That was the only time I ever used it for anything.
I was learning on C++ and a couple of courses use C, but only a couple. But I don't think I've ever really written a line of Java ever, which is not necessarily by design, although I'm not complaining, but it just kind of happened that way. Cause again, I learned C++, a little bit of C. I actually took one course in C#, which was extremely convenient in a couple of years into my career. But no, I was all C++.
You are not missing much.
Oh yeah, I know I'm not. And I mean, C++ is it's got so many problems. I hear it's better these days, just like Linux on the desktop, but it's got so many problems.
I heard recently that it's going to get worse. Like, I mean, someone was telling me that the C++ 20 standard is like, this is the breaking point. This is where C++ it's just going to go over the deep end and jump the shark. And I was like, C++ has jumped so many sharks. It jumps an entire ocean full of sharks. Like the ship so long ago sailed on C++ becoming so complicated that no one person can hold it in their mind. Like that's so long, and still in the context of C++, C++ 20 has this reputation of being like, oh, now they've gone too far. So I can only imagine what is in that standard. C++ is a great example of a language that is a victim of its own success that they just keep adding things to, and it's just. I really do hope for Swift to be able to someday replace C++ because like, let's reset the wart clock. You know what I mean? Like every language gets warts over time, right? But there's no way to like fix a language like C++ to get rid of all those things, because that's just what it is. And I was telling my son, like, all those video games that you love to play, they're all written, unfortunately, in C++ with some scripting thing in the middle there for the parts that aren't performance critical. But yeah, it's a giant wad of C++. The Destiny, the game I play all the time, is the most fiendishly complicated mess of C++ you could ever imagine. There's a great GDC session where the Destiny developers were explaining how Destiny works under the covers, and it is way more complicated than you think it is, because it has to be. Because if you look at the hardware that it's running on, like, everything has to be multi-threaded. You have to use all those cores. You have to use the GPU. Like, the inner world of a modern console or PC game written in C++ is just like this incredible alien city that you can't even imagine. Like, I imagine that someone who working on the core of an operating system would look at a game like Destiny and be like, run away screaming, because it is so much more complicated than something like an operating system kernel, because it has to do so much more, and because it's written, not from scratch, but nearly from scratch by a random collection of people with strange opinions for a particular purpose. And then it's so different, so much different than building a platform. It's like, we're going to build a game. Maybe the game will last 10 years. Maybe this code base will last 20. But then we're all going to move on to the next thing. And so they end up being really weird. Anyway, C++, we need a replacement. I'm not sure if Swift is it, but something needs to be it.
Oh, don't worry. Swift has taken all of the worst things about C++ and adopted it. It's made it new and clean.
Oh,
it hasn't, though. You don't understand. You don't know what the worst things about C++ are if you think Swift has taken the worst of them.
Thanks to our sponsors this week, Squarespace, Hullo, and Lumen 5. And we will see you next week.
Now the show is over. They didn't even mean to begin, 'cause it was accidental. Oh, it was accidental. John didn't do any research. Marco and Casey wouldn't let him, 'cause it was accidental. Oh, it was accidental. And you can find the show notes at atp.fm. And if you're into Twitter, you can follow them at CASEYLISS. So that's Casey Liss, MARCOARMENT, Marco Arment, SIRAC, USA Syracuse. It's accidental. They didn't mean to. Accidental. Tech podcast so long.
Oh, how is the I don't know, the swim plan going?
I was in the ocean, but not further than like chest level, because the waves were too big. And Tiff even suggested that was probably not a good time to go further than that.
Is she in the water with you?
Not that time, no. Because the waves were too big.
Assuming she can swim and everything, it would be
a
good idea to have somebody like actually there with you, sort of directing where you should go and what you should do at various times.
Yes,
so
that was
have a more successful experience.
Yes, that's the plan, and that's why I didn't go further that time, because the waves were too big even for her to want to go in. So we decided we will wait for a better opportunity where the waves are more calm, and then we will go in together, and she will show me what to do. And then I got hit pretty strong by a wave that she described as, that one was an under, and I didn't go under it. So I was very sandy after that.
It's all part of the experience.
It was a lot of sand.
You got to know where to stand, when to dive underneath, when to just go down, when to jump up, where not to be in general, all sorts of good things to learn. And then once you get the basics, you can learn how to do body surfing, which is fun.
What is that?
That's when you catch a wave, but you don't have a surfboard, you just got your body. And it seems like a thing that shouldn't be possible, and you'll try to do it many times. It'll be like, I just feel like I'm flopping. Eventually, you will actually catch a wave, and you'll be like, oh, that's how it's supposed to work. And that's the fun experience. The first time you actually catch a wave body surfing. It's probably easier to do it on a boogie board or something. But yeah, first learn how to survive the waves. Second, learn how to, play in them, because there's lots of fun things you can do. So either get a boogie board or try to learn to body surf, but they're both fun.
Yeah. Step 1, learn how to not die.
Yeah.
Seems like a good step.
Do you have a boogie board? Do kids still call them boogie boards? I don't know what you would call them otherwise.
They do still call them that. I don't have one. I mean, I could get one, but I think I don't think I'm ready for that yet. I think step one is like, I mean, I've used boogie boards like when I was a kid in the lake as just like flotation devices.
Yeah, no, it's different when you're actually catching a wave.
Yeah, never like in the ocean with real waves or anything. So yeah, step one is like learn how to use the waves and not die.
Well, it seems like it to be, I don't know if it's just because we're all big and fat now, but there's like this epidemic of boogie boards breaking all the time. I seem to remember as a kid that you'd have a boogie board and you'd use it summer after summer, it would be fine. And now, as an adult, every time we get boogie boards, like they last 2 trips to the beach and then they're cracked in half. Obviously, we're buying cheap boogie boards, but I feel like even a cheap one should like hold up a little bit longer than that. I don't want to buy a real, quote unquote, real boogie board because they're expensive. I just want to buy, a cheap toy thing so you can have 7 of them for all of the cousins. And we all go in and they use them. And then eventually, after 40 minutes, someone comes out of the ocean with this floppy looking thing that's cracked in the middle and go, well, this one's dead.
I have learned like one thing, and I think I discussed this briefly last time, but like my conception of what swimming is not what people seem to be doing almost ever in the water.
What do you think it is?
I think, well, what people seem to be doing in the water is more like wading in and occasionally swimming for a brief second and then standing back up again. Or for me, like what I'm learning to do is basically like do laps and exercise in a pool.
Well, you have to be able to, like you're talking about transport. You have to be able to transport yourself. So what you're learning is if I'm in the water and I'm at point A and I want to get to point B, how do I do that? So that's what you're learning, right?
Right.
But when you're playing in the ocean, sometimes you need to get from point A to point B. Sometimes A and B are very close to each other and just repositioning yourself in the waves. But mostly you're learning how not to drown. So you're learning to tread water and learning how to deal with the waves and learning how to hold your breath and not, get tumbled around and get water shoved up your nose and not drown and not be pulled in by the undertow or whatever. And sometimes during that activity, you will need to actually transport your body from one place to the other, and you will swim a short or medium or long distance. And if it's a riptide, you may swim a long distance to get back to shore, right? So you need to be able to do that. But you're right that people aren't doing laps in the surf. If you go beyond the waves, you've probably seen this at the beach, people do laps back and forth parallel to the beach beyond the breakers, which is, a relaxing thing you can do when you get a little more experience, is to go out past the surf and then watch the people playing in the surf from the other side, where you're just kind of bobbing up and down. You could just float there, or you could do laps.
To be fair, while I don't go to the beach as often as some people do, I go maybe once a week, but like during actual swimming hours, like I go almost every day with hops, but that's like pre or post lifeguard hours. So there aren't a lot of people in the water. But when I do go during like full-blown daylight lifeguard covered in sunscreen hours, I don't think I've ever seen a single person swimming laps in the ocean.
I mean, it's not laps. You're just, swimming.
But like exercise. Just like swimming, like yeah. I've never seen people do that in the ocean. I see people do it occasionally in the bay, frequently in like the gym pool or like the hotel pools. But like
they might be out there be super early in the morning. Like when does Hockenberry do it? That's the thing that he does.
Yeah,
it's actually easier to do than in a pool because salt water is more buoyant than fresh water.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit more relaxing. Of course, anyway, it can be cold and windy and all sorts of other reasons. Obviously, a lap pool is more controlled environment if you're just there to exercise. But one of the things that some people like to do when they go to the beach, some people like to play in the surf the whole time. Some people like to go past it and just float, and some people like to go past it and maybe swim back and forth 2 times, then come back in.
I've definitely seen it.
Like ultimately, like I'm really enjoying the exercise part of swimming. I mean, granted, I've known to swim now for about like a month, so this is not like a a huge forever opinion probably, but I really enjoy the exercise part of it, like going back and forth doing laps, like in the gym pool. That's nice, and I appreciate the aerobic and strength value of that. But like what most people seem to want to do most of the time in the water doesn't appeal to me at all.
Well, I mean, they're playing in the water, right? So you learning how to use a boogie board, learning how to body surf, or even just playing in the waves and enjoying big waves coming and dealing with them, like sort of like the waves are, it's like video game. The waves are sort of waves of enemies or adversaries, and sometimes they're little ones, sometimes they're big ones, and you're just basically playing in the surf, playing in a part where it's not dangerous, but where you constantly have to be not doing battle with the waves, but sort of like dealing with them, riding them, right? It's just you're playing in the surf, right? It's basic play. And if that doesn't appeal, you might want to the older people who goes out past them, which itself is a fun game. How do you get out past the surf without, getting tumbled and having salt water go up your nose, right? So that's a little skill section. And then your reward is you get to be out past the surf and relax. And floating on your back in salt water, which is, again, more buoyant, can be relaxing. You just hang out there and talk with the other adults who are just hanging out there, or the old person with their swim cap, or whatever person in the ocean you want to become, Marco. You can decide what you want to do. And yeah, you can swim laps back and forth back there too. But yeah, playing in the surf is worth figuring out how to do and having fun with it, because it is kind of fun. And eventually Adam, will, assuming he goes through swim lessons and all that stuff, will want to do the same thing, because kids love playing in the surf.
He's actually, so this summer we have a rental house that has a pool, and he has loved it, and he has really taught himself a lot of swimming so far, and he keeps doing it, and he's advancing pretty quickly. So that's likely to happen quickly, I think. In fact, he and I might be learning the ocean at the same time over the next few weeks. We'll see how that goes.
Kids can be intimidated by, like, the pool is a good place to start and learn stuff, because depending on the kid, they can be intimidated by the waves. And like your experience of assuming you have gotten knocked down by a wave and had salt water go up your nose, that can happen to a kid once. And that could be like a 3-year delay of like, all right, I will revisit this whole ocean thing several years from now when I have forgotten this experience. But some kids are like, that happens to them and they just bounce right back. So it really, really depends.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm slowly getting there, making progress.
Did you get salt water up your nose?
No, actually, I didn't.
That's an essential part of the experience.
I got knocked down pretty hard, and I got sand everywhere, but
that's part of it, but also the part of salt water being forcibly jammed up your nose by the waves. You're
really selling it. This is really
it's part of the experience. Tasting that and spitting it out for the next 10 minutes. You have to do it at least once or twice to know what not to do. It's like dereferencing a null pointer. It's part of the experience of programming.
Not an Objective-C, am I right? The thing that is most striking to me about Marco's description of your ability or inability to swim is that we met at a lakeside community, 20 plus years ago, wherein you had spent pretty much all summer, every summer, if I'm not mistaken, for most of your childhood within 100 yards of water.
Of the dirt beach in your mud lake?
Yep. And I spent a lot of time in the dirt beach, in the mud lake. However, I was using flotation devices.
Which is terribly dangerous. Like, if you don't know how to swim and you're just out on a flotation device, it's just, it's like stored up potential energy of death. It's like, I'm fine, but if this flotation device squirts out from under me, I'm going to sink like a stone and die, which is not good.
Well, there were other people around, but
they would be able to fish your body out pretty quickly. You're right.
I would venture a guess to say that going in the ocean with all of its giant waves and riptides and jellyfish and sharks is way more dangerous than that.
No, but like, it's once you can swim, like, I would recommend, if you can't swim, don't go in the water where you can't stand. If you can't swim, don't go in the surf for sure. But if you can't swim, even in a lake, don't go swimming in the lake holding onto a floaty out, past where you can stand. Because what happens if you let go of the floaty? It's bad. People drown in lakes all the time. The ocean, it's like, oh, I can see I shouldn't go there. That looks dangerous. And your lake, you're like, oh, I got a floaty. I'm fine. You're not fine. Learn how to swim. Marco was saved by the fact that he was just inside on his computer the whole time.
Exactly right. And I was there with him most times.
That's right. It's much safer. Very, very low chance of drowning in front of the computer.
First of all, I didn't even own a computer until 6th grade, and I wasn't allowed to bring it to the lake for the summer until high school, at least, like middle high school. So there was a lot of time where I just had to deal with it, and I played in the water with my friends. But I had a boogie board, or I had a life jacket, or I had a floaty thing, or whatever.
Were you in over your head?
Yeah. Sometimes we'd go out on boats, and we'd swim off the boats in the middle. But then I would have a life jacket.
Yeah, even then, I don't like the idea of people who can't swim tooling around with life jackets, because you got to be able to swim. You got to have that backup.
Now I do.
There you go.
I just have very little experience, so I still have a lot of things to do. Like to give you some idea of my skills so far. Like, in the pool, I can go back and forth a lot. I'm good with freestyle for a little while. I can do a backstroke for a long time. I can do a breaststroke for a long time. Yesterday, I finally figured out how to do a breaststroke underwater and have the right breathing rhythm to come up here and there. Like, that took me until yesterday to get that right. Like, I could do it above water indefinitely, but to do like down and up and down and up, that, without just falling, that took a while.
Yeah, a good thing to do in the pool is to work on how long you could hold your breath. So basically swim underwater back and forth in the pool as many times as you can without coming up for air. That's a good, safe thing to practice in a pool, because if you get caught in the right kind of wave, you may be under there for a while, and it's good to be able to not panic when you are not able to come to the surface for a long period of time, and to have the confidence, like, it's not a big deal. I can hold my breath here for 10, 15 seconds before I reorient and get my bearings and find the surface and go back up to it.
Yeah, that sounds awful. You're really not selling the whole ocean thing.
But it's fun to do in the pool. Like, it's fun to see how many times can you go back and forth in the pool underwater. It helps you can do those little flip kick turns and everything, and it's a fun competition. Help build your lung capacity.
Fun.
It'll give you the confidence to say, if I'm under the water, no big deal. I hold my breath for a really long time all the time. I got all the time in the world. I could be down here for a minute and a half.
Yeah, but I think I'm still going to avoid things like waves. It sounds like I'm still going to go on like the super green flag day. Like, I'm going to wait until they put 2 green flags in the pool, and that's when I'm going to go.
I saw the videos from the beach that have been posted. The surf does not look particularly rough there. Like, it's not like Smith's Point or something. I feel like obviously the weather changes from day to day, but I think the shape of the beach and the ocean currents and whatever, it's not particularly rough. So you should have plenty of good days to play.